Kuhn Review, print speaking to the blind, celebrating 40 years of audio newspaper production. Welcome to this week's edition of the National Podcast, recorded at the Bishop Briggs Media Centre by our amazing volunteers. You can get in touch with us via Facebook, Twitter or Instagram using @KuhnReview, that is @CuandReview. You can also contact us directly by emailing information@kuhnreview.com. That is INFORMATION@CuandReview.com, or by calling 0141 772 3976. That's 0141 772 3976.
From the National News section, Friday the 21st of August. Anti-Zionist activist cleared of inviting support for Hamas. Written by Steph Brun. A Jewish anti-Zionist activist has been cleared of inviting support for Hamas after the October 7 attacks. Tony Greenstein, 72, of Brighton, was charged with one count of inviting support for a proscribed terrorist organisation relating to 3 posts he made on October 7, 2023, after the Hamas-led attack on Israel. Greenstein described Gaza as a human prison and told Kingston Crown Court that while he believed the attack was justified, he does not support Hamas. He said, "When a colonial power holds another people down, they have the right to resist." On Friday afternoon, a jury of 5 women and 7 men found Greenstein not guilty after 2 hours, 11 minutes of deliberation. Greenstein grinned and looked visibly emotional as the verdict was read out, and supporters in the public gallery gasped excitedly. Giving evidence to the court on Thursday, Greenstein said Palestinians had been locked up for 57 years and accused the judge of turning a blind eye to genocide. He said it was a cage in which people lived. Imagine you could not escape 25 miles north of here and 5 miles wide, and imagine having to live there and not being allowed out. On multiple occasions during his evidence, Judge Sarah Plaschke, KC, halted proceedings to ask Greenstein to stop talking about the history of Israel and Palestine. Greenstein said to the judge, "That's the problem with the ruling class in this country. They turn a blind eye to genocide." Judge Plaschke warning Greenstein about treating the trial as a political forum and said the jury was not concerned with events in the Middle East. The court heard that in the social media post, Greenstein wrote the line, "Please share full support for the Gaza ghetto uprising." Jurors were told the post had linked to a blog which included the line, "The time to fight is now. Whatever criticisms one can make of Hamas, we should congratulate them on this well-planned and audacious attack on the Zionist enemy." Greenstein, his father was an Orthodox Jewish rabbi, argued congratulating Hamas was a figure of speech, and called the prosecution's assertion absurd. He'd also written extensively about disagreeing with Hamas in his blog, which has more than 3,500 posts, the court heard. Titles of pieces Greenstein had published included "Hamas does its best to make Palestinian lives a misery," and encouraged those who had illusions in Hamas to think again. Before the jury returned their verdicts, Judge Plaschke indicated that she had considered contempt of court against Greenstein, who gave a closing speech to the jury earlier on Friday. The judge said that on calm reflection, she had concluded that it was a rambling speech delivered by an old man and would not have impacted the jury's decision. In a speech outside court, Greenstein said he wanted to see David Lammy, Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper on trial for having helped Israel perpetrate a genocide. Opposing genocide is not a crime. Supplying arms to Israel to perpetrate a genocide is a crime. That's the nature of our judicial system. They prosecute the wrong people, he said. Greenstein added, "They, the jury, knew very well I wasn't supporting Hamas. I was supporting the Palestinian people in their just struggle against the Zionist occupation. So let us take heart from what's happened today and let's go forward and never forget. Unity is strength, and that is what has made us strong." The jury saw throughout a full public gallery, and we have to give the same support to all the defendants who are going through trials at the moment. They are guilty of nothing more than opposing genocide. Written by Steph Brun and read by Billy Gordon. From the National News section, Friday the 21st of August. Argentina fined over Las Malvinas Falklands World Cup banner. Written by Lucy Jackson. Argentina have been fined for displaying a Falkland Islands banner after the country's semi-final win over England. The Argentine Football Association, AFA, has been fined $321,000, £235,000, in relation to the displaying of a banner at the end of the World Cup semi-final, which read, "Las Malvinas son Argentinas," which translates as "The Falkland Islands are Argentinian." The fine also covered breaches by Argentina supporters of FIFA's anti-discrimination regulations at other World Cup matches. For the discrimination offence, the AFA has been ordered to play the country's next home match at 50% capacity, with a 50% capacity restriction at a further match suspended. FIFA said $100,000 of the fine was also suspended. Political tensions linger between Argentina and Great Britain over the Falkland Islands, which boiled over into a conflict in 1982. Argentina has repeatedly claimed sovereignty over the Falkland Islands, which are about 8,000 miles from Britain and 300 miles from mainland Argentina. The banner was condemned by UK politicians at the time it was displayed, with Lib Dem leader Ed Davey calling for the players who held it to be suspended. UEFA had previously banned 2 Spain players, Rodri and Alvaro Morata, after they sang about Spain's claims to Gibraltar after their Euro 2024 triumph. UK Government Business Secretary Peter Kyle also described the banner as entirely inappropriate. On August 6th, the AFA announced that the date of the semi-final win over England, July the 15th, would be commemorated as National Football Teams Day in the future. FIFA's decision to fine Argentina rather than take any stronger action is in contrast to the threat of sporting sanctions, starting with the yellow card. FIFA made if England captain Harry Kane wore a rainbow-coloured One Love armband at the 2022 World Cup in Qatar, a country where homosexuality is criminalised. The AFA said the portion of the $321,000 fine related to the display of the banner was $10,000, £7,300, with a further $20,000, £14,700, for the inappropriate conduct of supporters. The Federation said its legal department would request from FIFA the grounds for the rulings that are reviewable in order to file appeals before the Appeals Committee of the governing body of world football, leaving in the future the possibility of appealing to the CAS as a last resort in relation to all the sanctions imposed. 3 Argentina players have also been banned for their part in a brawl at the end of last month's World Cup final against Spain. Midfielder Leandro Paredes has been hit hardest and given a 10-match ban and a $90,000 fine by FIFA's disciplinary committee, while defender Nahuel Molina was given a 7-match suspension and fined the same amount. Thiago Almada was given a 1-match ban and a $30,000, £22,000 fine, while Argentina coach Roberto Ayala was banned for 3 matches and fined the same amount. Spain's Gavi has also been given a 1-match ban and a $30,000 fine. Written by Lucy Jackson and read by Billy Gordon. From the National. Politics section. Friday the 21st of August. John Swinney joins Andy Burnham in honouring victims of terrorism. Written by Jamie Calder. The First Minister has reiterated his support for people impacted by terrorist attacks, marking the inaugural day for victims and survivors of terrorism in London. He appeared at the event on Friday alongside UK Prime Minister Andy Burnham. The day aims to raise further awareness of the huge impact terrorism has on victims, survivors and bereaved families. It has been set up to remember and recognise those impacted by terrorism, while also encouraging victims and survivors to access specialist support, educating the public and amplifying victims and survivors' stories. As this year marks the first time the day has been observed, a special ceremony was held in central London. Speaking after the event, Swinney said, "Scotland stands with all those affected by terrorism. This National Day is extremely important to honour victims and survivors and to remember those whose lives have been changed forever by these appalling acts. The Scottish Government will continue to support victims, amplify their voices and work with partners across the UK to help protect communities from the threat of terrorism. Our objective is to keep communities safe and put victims at the heart of Scotland's justice system so they receive the support they need." The UK Government said the event brought together victims, survivors, bereaved families, first responders and government representatives for a moment of remembrance, hope and unity. Andy Burnham also pledged to consult the victims and survivors of terrorism about creating a permanent national memorial. Speaking at the event, he said, "Your voices must be at the heart of every decision about how we remember and recognise those affected by terrorism. With your help, we will change the way this country recognises and supports you, but most importantly, from here, obviously, those in some ways coming after you, because that's what this country should do." He thanked everyone who had campaigned for a dedicated day for terrorism survivors. "This day does matter, as all the speakers have said. It is our way of saying that we see you, we hear you, we stand with you, and the whole country does too. I want to thank everyone who campaigned for this day to make it happen." And the victims and survivors of more than 20 atrocities, we think of those victims today. the loved ones that you lost, but we thank those who have stood strong in all those years since, and we thank everyone who's made the organisation of today possible. It matters for another and more difficult reason, and it's one that I can talk about perhaps in a way that the other speakers couldn't today. It helps bring forward change that the country needs, change in the way that we support people after these devastating and traumatic events. I know from the many hours I've spent with survivors in Manchester that too often people have not had the support that they deserved, and they've had to fight for it in the aftermath. Written by Jamie Calder and read by Billy Gordon. From the National. Politics section. Friday the 21st of August. SNP should consider £2 fare cap for trams, says Lothian Bus's boss. Written by Xander Elliards. The Scottish Government should consider extending the £2 bus fare cap to trams to avoid an adverse impact on Edinburgh's public transport network, the Chief Executive of Lothian Buses has said. Sarah Boyd, who leads both Lothian Buses and Edinburgh Trams, told The National that careful planning would be needed to ensure there is no unintended consequence from the Scottish Government's bus fare cap policy. Before the 2026 Holyrood election, First Minister John Swinney said that a new SNP government would cap the cost of bus journeys at £2 across all of Scotland. The policy was piloted in the Highlands and Islands and is due for a second test scheme in the Greater Glasgow area. Boyd said that as one of the policy's key aims is to get more people using public transport, it should be remembered that Edinburgh is not at the same starting point. We have 36% of Scotland's bus passenger journeys, she said. If what we're saying is we're trying to make Scotland world-class, then I don't necessarily think there's a one-size-fits-all approach. The Pan-Scotland, bus-only approach, I think if you take that and apply it to Edinburgh's perspective, not having trams included when one of the key aims is integration, one of the key succession measures is to make it easier for people to use and to access. We know that when we launched contactless payments, for example, across both bus and tram last May, both modes grew because we made it easier for people to use and to access. So actually, if bus fares are capped but tram fares are not, then that is going to have an adverse impact, if you like, on the tram network. I think we have to be so careful that there's not an unintended consequence, Boyd added. However, the Lothian Buses chief executive stopped short of supporting extending the £2 cap to trams, saying, "Until we know exactly how this would impact on both Edinburgh Trams and Lothian Buses, until they can properly model something, I want to be really careful not to be saying anything supportive or not supportive, because at this stage, I don't know the answer. I know that my job is to make sure that Edinburgh and the network thrives, that I leave it better than I found it. Lothian Buses and Edinburgh Trams raised the fee for a single journey in February from £2.20 to £2.40. So a £2 cap could make a big difference to the firm's revenue, Boyd said. However, she went on, it depends on what the reimbursement rate would be, and again that's something that is just at very early stages. We don't have all the facts in front of us yet. There are still questions around what's included, what's not. For example, things like night buses, express buses, airport services. Until you know what a reimbursement model would look like, it's not possible to calculate what that would then total up to. The SNP previously suggested that operators would be given the difference between the £2 cap and the actual price of the ticket. Boyd said that any model would have to have mechanisms to prevent the public purse being overcharged, but also to balance fairness for business. There has to be a mechanism in place to recognise things like inflation. Operators face considerable cost pressures around wages, fuel, she said. The other thing is that, as a whole, the Edinburgh network is growing already, so you would have to work out, reverse engineer almost, what growth you would have achieved anyway in these areas, and what is the additional, hopefully, that could be attributed to a fare cap. While the details of the scheme remain at the early stages, the Scottish Greens have said, called on the government to urgently accelerate the rollout of the £2 bus fare cap across Scotland. Party co-leader Gillian Mackay questioned why there was not yet a timeline in place for the Strathclyde pilot or the national rollout. The £2 bus fare cap has been a game changer for thousands of people across the Highlands and Islands, helping families and regular travellers to cut the cost of getting around, reducing emissions and keeping more money in people's pockets, Mackay said. It has shown what is possible when we put affordable, accessible public transport at the heart of our policies. But progress is now stalled, and the Scottish Government is dragging its feet on extending the scheme. The Scottish Government must set out a clear timetable and get on with rolling out the £2 fare cap across the country. The Scottish Government was approached for comment. Written by Xander Elliards and read by Billy Gordon.
From the National, date Friday the 21st of August, from the Culture section. Dundee Community Cafe forced to close after racist abuse. Written by Marco Sutti. A Scottish community cafe has been forced to close, with staff saying it has become impossible to operate safely due to alleged racist abuse. Representatives from Lochee Community Larder and Cafe in Dundee have said they took the difficult decision to shut the popular community spot, citing a rise in serious antisocial behaviour. The cafe previously shut its doors in June after staff faced unacceptable levels of abuse. It had marketed itself as a social gathering space for the community. It also operates a larder which provides free and low-cost groceries to those in need, which will remain open. Speaking to the Courier, a spokesperson for the cafe said, Lochee Community Larder and Cafe took the difficult decision to temporarily close their community cafe in response to a recent rise in serious antisocial behaviour within and around the premises. Over the past several months, staff, volunteers, customers, and neighbouring residents have been affected by incidents including drug taking and suspected dealing, racist abuse, intimidation, violence, and behaviour that has left customers and volunteers feeling frightened and unsafe. We have also received multiple complaints from neighbours regarding disruptive and threatening conduct outside the building. Our cafe exists to provide a warm, welcoming and inclusive space for everyone in the community. However, the level of behaviour we have recently experienced has made it impossible for us to operate safely. The well-being of our volunteers, staff, customers and local residents must come first. We are therefore closing the cafe temporarily while we work with partner agencies including community safety teams, local authorities and Police Scotland to review the situation and put stronger measures in place. This pause will allow us to reset the environment, strengthen safeguarding procedures and ensure that when we reopen, the cafe is once again a safe and respectful place for all. The community larder remains open as usual, and our team continues to support local households with food access and advice. Larder bosses say they are hoping to repurpose the cafe as a space for community groups to meet, with a new social club for over 65s already up and running. Local councillor Wendy Scullen has been lending her support to the community larder session since the cafe closed. She said, "You can see that there's definitely a level of aggression from some people that have been turning up, and these are people that are not using the larder facility. These are just people sort of hanging around. It's not been the best of atmospheres," she added. "I think there's a lot of misunderstanding on why the decision to close the cafe was made. I think that's caused some resentment, but there's absolutely no reason for any of these volunteers who don't get paid to be facing any level of abuse from anyone. There's no other facility like this. If Lochee was to lose this, it would be absolutely devastating. There's people that rely on this facility. There's other food larders and food banks nearby, but nothing to this level, and if this was too close and people want to go in other places." Meanwhile, some users of the cafe have hit out at the decision. Alison Keir, a regular visitor to the cafe, said people who are suffering from mental health issues and rely on that place as somewhere to go for a chat are missing out, and nobody really understands why it's closed. Police Inspector Susan Cook said the police were aware of concerns around antisocial behaviour at the cafe, adding they were working closely with local community safety wardens to review the situation. She added that those involved should have more respect for the communities in which they live. That article was written by Marco Sutti.
This is from The National on Monday 24th August 2026, from the Politics section. Brexit hits Scottish universities as EU students fall by 60%. By Xander Elliards. Brexit has hammered Scotland's university sector, the SNP have said, after figures showed a fall of more than 60% in the number of EU students. There were 20,895 students from the European Union enrolled in Scottish universities in the academic year 2019-20, according to figures from the Scottish Parliament Information Centre. But with the UK having left the trading bloc at the end of January 2020, that total has fallen to 8,140 by 24 to 25, a drop of 61%. SNP MSP Alan Smith, who was previously a member of the European Parliament, branded the decline one of the disastrous consequences of the vote to leave the EU. While Scots as a whole voted to remain in the EU in the 2016 referendum, the UK narrowly voted to leave. Research by the Higher Education Policy Institute found that Brexit had had a dramatic impact on the number of incoming EU students, saying they had previously made up 1 in 4 of all international students arriving in the UK, but adding that had fallen so that European students make up 1 in 12 of all new international students. This decline is reported to have cost the UK economy almost £3 billion. And while the number of international students from outside the EU has risen, the SNP said the figures showed an overall drop of 4,645 overseas students, raising concerns about the impact on Scotland's economy. Smith said, "Scotland was dragged out of Europe against our will, but we are left facing the disastrous consequences every day. Nowhere is that felt more than in our world-class universities. These figures show Brexit has hammered our universities, but attracting the brightest and best overseas students to Scotland also meant these people made Scotland their home. That is an incredible economic benefit that Scotland has lost." With the SNP pledging an independent Scotland that would seek to rejoin the EU, Smith said this would allow the country to rebuild ties with our neighbours and build a wealthier Scotland back at the heart of Europe where we belong. The UK government has been contacted for comment. That article was by Xander Elliards.
From the National, date 24th of August 2026, from the sports section. Celtic face injury blow as first team star misses training. Written by James McLaughlin. Celtic face another injury concern after Austin Trusty missed training before the Champions League playoff second leg against LASK, according to a new report. Martin O'Neill is already without Alistair Johnston, expected to miss up to 6 weeks with a hamstring problem. Trusty, 28, played the full first leg against LASK, and every minute of Celtic's 2 Premiership matches. He started the Premier Sports Cup win over Dundee United, scoring the opener before being replaced after 67 minutes. Celtic travel to Austria for the match, with Liam Scales and Dane Murray possible replacements. The club has not confirmed why Trusty missed Monday morning's training session at Celtic Park, per the Scottish Sun. The report also states that the club is considering full-back recruitment. Southampton's Japan international, Yuki Sugawara, is thought to be available, while Nico Sigur of Hajduk Split has been linked with Parkhead. The Scottish champions are also working on season-long loan deal for Chelsea left-back Imenalo, who is expected to provide cover for Kieran Tierney. That article was written by James McLaughlin and read by Ewing. From the National, Date 24th of August 2026 from the sports section. EPL manager backs ex-Rangers boss after poor start. Written by Stuart Wilson. Russell Martin has been backed to succeed at Leicester City by Ipswich boss Gary O'Neill. The former Rangers head coach has faced a challenging 18 months after his departures from Southampton and Rangers, with his Leicester side recently suffering a League One defeat to Burton Albion. However, O'Neill, Martin's former Norwich City teammate, believes the ex-Ibrox boss has the skills to bounce back. O'Neill said, "We played together. I know Russ. We have stayed in touch, and I have followed his coaching career. He has done unbelievably well and a fantastic job at Southampton. He will test us. I don't know Russ's situation, and I don't know what has gone on really. But I know he is an intelligent guy and a good coach. I expect him to do a fantastic job at Leicester. I think it is a fantastic appointment from them." That article was written by Stuart Wilson and read by Ewing.
From the National, Tuesday the 25th of August 2026, from the politics section. Real Scottish politics. Melanie Ward in painful attempt at government by TikTok. An article written by Abby Garton Crosby. The Scotland Office has, for some reason, decided that the best way to explain how the Barnett formula works is by flinging chips about. In a social media video, Scotland Office Minister Melanie Ward suggested that a proper fish supper is a surprisingly simple way to explain how public spending works. The Labour MP for Cowdenbeath and Kirkcaldy then presents 2 boxes of fish and chips. This one represents equivalent public spending across the rest of the UK, because we pool and share resources across the UK. The Scottish Government's per person budget is over 20% larger, she says, motioning to the first takeaway box. This piece is called the Block Grant, and it's the foundation of the Scottish Government's funding every year, Ward says of the second. Decisions about spending for things like defence, foreign affairs and pensions for the entire UK are reserved to the UK Government. But when the UK Government increases spending on devolved areas, like health or education in England, that can mean more funding for Scotland too. That's the Barnett formula. Ward then goes on to say, it works out any additional funding for Scotland based on Scotland's share of the population whenever spending changes in devolved areas. Those additions are called Barnett consequentials. So, whenever spending goes up in England, the Scottish Government's budget can go up too, on top of that higher starting point. It's then entirely up to the Scottish Government what that funding is spent on, whether that's health, education, transport or other devolved priorities. What doesn't change is that Scotland's budget is proportionally ahead of equivalent spending per person in the rest of the UK. Now at the National, we're all for making politics accessible. It's part of what we do as journalists. But after watching that video, with an understanding of how the Barnett formula actually works, we were left with more questions than answers. We also wondered, where has this UK government obsession with explaining political policy through the medium of foodstuffs come from? Ward isn't the first to do it. In December last year, Glasgow South Labour MP Gordon McKee racked up more than 3.3 million views on Twitter/X with a video where he explained the UK's debt to GDP ratio using stacks of custard creams and chocolate bourbons. And who can forget Prime Minister Andy Burnham and Chancellor John Healey rating pub snacks? These videos are supposed to feel relatable, but they end up coming off as patronising. There is coming up with an idea that works once, and then overdoing it so much that it loses its impact. Do they really think grown adults can only understand economic concepts if you explain it to them like they're a child? Or is it more likely that the only people paying attention are other Labour MPs and journalists who can pat each other on the back for their innovative social media use that really cuts through to the everyman? In response to Ward's video, SNP MSP Karen Adams said, "This patronising guff shows exactly how Westminster treats Scotland, expecting us to be grateful for what we are entitled to. The same UK Labour government that slashed funding for Scotland's fishing industry decides to use a fish supper for this insulting video. You really couldn't make it up. It's no surprise that people in Scotland have had enough and voted for a record number of pro-independence MSPs in May's election. It's high time that the Labour Party wakes up to this reality and gives Scotland the right to decide its own future." Social media users were also unimpressed, branding the video condescending. Maybe the Scotland office should try doing some actual work for a change, rather than trying to sell voters a load of old cod. This article was written by Abby Garton Crosby and read by Ian McKenna. From the National. Wednesday, the 25th of August 2026, from a news section. Podcaster James English found guilty of domestic abuse campaign, by Court Reporter. Scottish podcaster James English has been convicted of domestic abuse against his former partner. The 43-year-old repeatedly attacked a 30-year-old woman at his flat in Glasgow's Argyll Street and elsewhere between July 2022 and November 2023. English grabbed his victim by the neck and pinned her against a door while she was pregnant. He later pressed his thumbs into her eyebrows while she was pregnant, which caused redness. In an earlier incident, English kicked the model off a bed after she refused to give him a cuddle. Other violent incidences included pulling the woman by the hair, which caused her to lose her balance, and, on another occasion, slapped her on the face, causing redness. English, now of Larkhall, Lanarkshire, shot to fame after he starred in reality TV show Glow. He is also the host of the Anything Goes podcast, which has more than 800,000 subscribers on YouTube. English has interviewed stars such as ex-footballer Paul Gascoigne, boxer Tony Bellew, and snooker legend Jimmy White. English's attendance at Glasgow Sheriff Court for the verdict today/yesterday was excused by Sheriff David Hall, who was told last week that he was out of the country. He was found guilty after a 12-day trial of engaging in a course of behaviour which was abusive to a partner or ex-partner. The single charge included a total of 19 allegations, and Sheriff Hall considered 6 of them to be proven. One allegation had been withdrawn mid-trial by the Crown. The court heard that the pair got together having initially chatted on social media app Instagram in July 2022 and met in person the following month. Evidence was heard by the woman remotely from a courtroom in her native Cardiff. She told the court that English was nice at first and that the relationship moved fast. The first act of violence came when they were lying together in bed in the early hours of the morning. She stated, "He said that he wanted a cuddle. I just said that I was feeling sick, just give me a minute." Prosecutor Daniel Docherty asked if English was happy, and she replied, "No." The woman said, "He kicked me off the bed to the side of my hip on the right side of my body as I was on the left side of the bed." When asked how forceful the kick was, the woman replied, "Yes, it was quite forceful because I hit the wardrobe when I came off the bed." The woman stated that she felt shocked and wanted to leave. She claimed English joined her 5 minutes later in the living room. She said, "He came over to the sofa where I was sat, and he grabbed me by the shoulders for me to stand and push me against the wall." When asked of what level of force was used, the woman replied, "Enough for me to be lifted from my feet." She stated that the incident lasted not a long time and stopped when he let her go. The woman recalled feeling frightened at the time. Miss Docherty asked how English seemed when he was doing it, and she replied, "Angry." The relationship continued and the woman discovered that she was pregnant. She stated that in a later incident they were both in a property together when English took a firm hold of her. Miss Docherty told the court in her closing submissions, "He seized her by the neck, compressed it and pinned her against the door. This first episode lasted 10 seconds. The woman told the court that she was petrified, just panicking, and he was aggressive. The woman further stated that during a second episode, which lasted 3 to 5 seconds, English grabbed her by the throat. Miss Docherty said, "He held her with a tight grip and she confirmed that she remained conscious throughout." In another incident, English pressed his thumbs into the woman's eyebrows while she was pregnant. The woman told the court that she experienced redness as a result. English, on a later occasion, pulled the woman by the hair, which caused her to lose her balance. Miss Docherty stated, "She said that her hair was long at the time and pulled it downwards." English's final act of violence was striking the woman's face with an open hand. The woman reported having redness to her face and later informed her brother about it. The child was also told that English sent threatening and abusive messages to her. Examples read out in court included, "You absolute waste," "Get a job and support your family," and called her a slag, fat slag, as well as a little b, expletive deleted. Another message told to the court said, "You're lucky I never f ***** ing battered you." Callum Weir, defending, told the court in his closing remarks that the Crown's case fell short of guilt beyond reasonable doubt. In relation to the violence and injuries, Mr. Weir said, "There was no evidence in terms of pictures for someone who described herself as online. This was someone savvy with an online presence." He later added, "There is no evidence or pictures. It simply did not happen." Mr. Weir stated that the victim was also vague with dates and there was no specific time given for each allegation. The lawyer also spoke about screenshots, pictures and recordings given to the court, which he said were cropped and the context was unclear, and perhaps spliced. It was revealed that English has previous convictions for mainly road traffic matters. When convicting English, Sheriff Hall told the court, "I considered the victim to be credible and reliable. I am satisfied that it is appropriate to convict all parts of the charge. There is a lot of evidence that this relationship was on-off between them. It was to me a relationship that was destined to fail and it somewhat dragged on." Sentence was deferred pending background reports until next month, and English's bail was continued in the meantime. By court reporter, read by Ian. From the National. Tuesday the 25th of August 2026. From the Politics section, exclusive. Reform Scotland considering married couples first social housing policy. An article written by political reporter Hamish Morrison. Reform UK Scottish branch is considering adopting a cruel proposal to give British-born married couples with children priority for social housing, the National can reveal. Thomas Kerr, the party's deputy leader in Holyrood, said he would be looking closely at the controversial plans unveiled by his Westminster counterpart Richard Tice earlier in the week. Tice said that workers under 35 who were born in Britain and married couples with children would go to the top of the social housing waiting lists under a reform government. The vast majority of social homes across the UK are likely to be occupied by British or Irish nationals. They made up 88.5% of main householders, the person in whose name the social home is rented, in 2024-25, while 11.5% were non-UK/Irish nationals, according to the English Housing Survey. Separate figures are not available for Scotland. Kerr told The National, "Reform in Scotland will be looking closely at this policy and how aspects of it might be relevant to Scottish housing. The public's eyes have been opened when it comes to young Scots being cheated out of social housing because properties are being used to temporarily house migrants or to satisfy a significant rise in homeless applications made from outside Scotland. We need to get a grip and start providing the same opportunity to Scots that we give to strangers. The proposal has been slammed, with Homelessness Charity Shelter previously saying that the reform's plans were a blatant distraction from the real cause of the housing emergency, which the organisation said was the failure to build affordable social homes. Iris Duane, the Glasgow Green MSP who has spoken in the past about growing up with a single parent, said the plans put families like hers at risk. She told The National, "As someone who was raised by a single parent, at times living in social housing, I find it utterly shameful that had I grown up under a reformed UK government, they would have put myself and my mum in immediate danger, for no better reason than to seem tough. It's a disgraceful indictment of how the Nasty Party label has found a new home." Duane added, "Prioritising people for social housing based on their nationality or relationship status actively excludes vulnerable individuals in our society who also need access to housing, including single parents, people fleeing domestic violence, and refugees with settled status who live, work, study and contribute to our society. The guise of prioritising married couples and UK-born nationals does not offer any real solutions to the housing crisis sweeping the UK. It is a blatant expansion of their most racist and misogynistic policies that would cause both intended and unintentional harm." Susan Murray, the Lib Dem Scottish Affairs spokesperson, hit out at the proposals and also slammed Reform UK's previous pledge to evict foreign nationals from social housing. She said, "Threatening UK residents and workers, including, for example, many of our nurses and healthcare professionals, with eviction because they were born outside the UK, shows the Reform Party are intent on dividing every local community for their own ends. This idea is a cruel gimmick aimed at victimising the poorest for Britain's failure to build the social homes we need. We need a serious plan to tackle the housing crisis, not irresponsible nonsense from Reform." Sarah Elliott, the chief executive of Shelter, said, "Reform's plan is to change how social housing is allocated and a blatant distraction from the real cause of the housing emergency, which is decades of political failure to build enough genuinely affordable social homes, not because any one group has had an unfair advantage. The solution is building more social homes, not changing the order of the queue." She said Reform's plans were designed to stoke division and would only serve to tear communities apart and put more people at risk of homelessness. Putting nationality and employment ahead of housing need and moving away from a system designed to prioritise people who are homeless or at urgent risk of homelessness could leave even more families trapped in awful temporary accommodation for years on end. Not to mention putting those escaping domestic abuse and violence at serious risk of harm. There are already strict rules on who can access social housing, and councils are legally required to prioritise people in greatest housing need. Elliott said the focus should instead be on building 90,000 social homes over the next decade. In response to criticism, Kerr added, "The attitude at Reform is dividing communities because it wants local people to benefit local areas by staying in local housing is ludicrous. What's more divisive for a community than housing busloads of strangers in towns and villages when many don't contribute and shun integration?" This article was written by Hamish Morrison and read by Ian McKenna.
From the National Comments section, Tuesday the 25th of August 2026. Scotland isn't immune from drought. We must start planning now. This article is by Martin Docherty Hughes. Scotland likes to think of itself as water-rich, but climate change is beginning to expose a harder truth. Having plenty of water in the country is not the same as having secure water where and when people, communities and businesses need it. On August the 13th, SEPA reported significant scarcity in parts of eastern Scotland, with many rivers experiencing low or very low river flows, while normal to high flows persisted in the northwest. Its warning was straightforward. As rainfall becomes less predictable, water may not always be available where and when it's needed. That is the difference between abundance and security. Scottish Water has made the same point. Its long-term strategy already estimates that without sufficient adaptation, the gap between supply and demand during extended dry periods could reach around 240 million litres a day by 2050. That is not an argument for panic, nor for announcing a vast pipeline from west to east. It's an argument for beginning the patient work of national infrastructure planning before scarcity turns from a warning into a constraint. Scotland should develop a phased national water resilience network, including stronger connections between existing supply zones, greater strategic storage, continued leakage reduction, and the identification and safeguarding of potential future transfer corridors. Some investments are already justified. Others may never be required. The point is to ensure that future governments are not left to discover, after decades of development, that the physical routes or engineering options they need have disappeared. This is where an apparently technical debate about reservoirs, treatment works, and pipelines becomes a political one. In 1975, Olof Palme argued that environmental policy required democratic planning to conserve natural resources and make long-term decisions that should not be left to short-term market forces. He also linked that planning to regional development and the fair distribution of resources. That is the social democratic case for a Scottish water resilience programme. Infrastructure is not valuable simply because government builds it. It's valuable because of the democratic capacity it creates. Secure water supplies sustain homes, agriculture, industry, and communities. They influence where economic development can take place and whether parts of Scotland can grow without being constrained by infrastructure inherited from a different climate. Palme's politics also warns against mistaking national planning for remote technocracy. His later argument for economic democracy sought a balance between comprehensive planning and decentralised decision-making. Decisions were more democratic and often better when workers, communities and citizens could influence them, rather than simply receive them from above. Scotland begins from an important institutional advantage. Scottish Water remains publicly owned and accountable to Scottish ministers and the Scottish Parliament, with surpluses reinvested in the system rather than distributed to shareholders. But public ownership does not, by itself, answer every democratic question. A national resilience programme should therefore involve local government, workers, agriculture, industry, environmental organisations, and the communities around reservoirs, catchments, and any future transfer infrastructure. Greater national resilience cannot mean treating one part of Scotland simply as a reserve for another. The summer scarcity has demonstrated why stronger connections may be needed, but any transfer must remain within ecological limits. River flows, groundwater catchments and ecosystems have needs of their own. The communities carrying the environmental burden of new infrastructure must also have a meaningful voice in how it is planned and what benefits it brings. This work does not need to wait for independence. Scotland already controls water policy, Scottish Water, and much of planning and environmental regulation. There's also a longer-term principle at stake. Climate-driven water scarcity will not stop at Scotland's borders, and future cooperation may be possible if Scotland eventually has sustainable surpluses that can assist others. But Scotland's own resilience and environmental limits must come first, and infrastructure paid for here cannot simply become a resource assumed to be available elsewhere without agreement or value. Solidarity cannot mean that a resource ceases to have an owner, a cost, or an environmental limit. The Scottish Government should now bring the work already underway together into a national water resilience and transfer study involving Scottish Water, SEPA, local authorities, and wider economic, environmental and community interests. It should examine supply and demand towards 2050, 2080 and 2100. Map weaknesses between existing systems, assess additional storage and transfer options, safeguard potential corridors and set ecological limits. Most importantly, it should separate three decisions that are too often blurred together. What Scotland should build now, what it should safeguard for later, and what it should trigger only if future conditions require it. The Scottish Government's own adaptation reporting says the test is whether action is proportionate to the risks we face. On water, the test is no longer abstract, it's right in front of us. Eastern Scotland has recorded its driest year in half a century, while this summer's scarcity warnings have shown how quickly pressure on supply develops. The question, therefore, is whether government is acting at the scale and pace required by the risk. Climate resilience depends on early decisions, sustained investment and infrastructure planned for conditions Scotland already knows are changing. There is a tendency to discuss the state principally in terms of what it spends. The more useful social democratic question is what capacity democratic society should possess, and water resilience is a practical test of that capacity. A weak state waits for scarcity and manages the emergency. A capable state recognises foreseeable risks, invests before they become crises, and leaves those who come afterwards with more choices rather than fewer. Scotland's response to climate change will be judged not only by what we protect, but by whether we choose to build the democratic capacity to secure the essentials of national life. And that article was written by Martin Docherty Hughes and read by Lynn McNeil.
The National Politics on Wednesday the 26th of August. Is the SNP going to put a pause on the AI data centre boom? An analysis article written by Hamish Morrison. AI data centres have leapt up the political agenda at a staggering pace. Under mounting pressure from campaigners, the Scottish Government last week announced measures to monitor more closely the development's environmental impact. But activists want them to go further, and they have good reason to be optimistic that the tide is with them. Artificial intelligence data centres are huge collections of computers which are able to provide the computing power to train large language models like ChatGPT. They require massive amounts of energy and require to be kept cool so that they don't overheat and break down. For these reasons, Scotland is viewed by developers as a good place to build. The country's cooler climate means it's less intensive to keep these systems cool. But it's also seen as a good place to build energy-intensive infrastructure because they're considered a significant development of national importance in the most recent planning framework published by the Scottish Government back in February of 2023. In this document, they're described as green data centres, without any explanation of what makes them green and what the criteria for that designation is, with those decisions to be taken by local authorities. What's clear from the document is that the Scottish Government wanted them built, giving them a favourable weighting in planning decisions. This has sparked a rash of planning applications, many of which campaigners believe are effectively land speculation rather than genuine statements of intent to build, which have been met with opposition from the communities who could end up living beside them. Action to Protect Rural Scotland has been at the forefront of the campaign against AI data centres and welcomed the Scottish Government's announcement last Monday that 2 proposed sites would need to produce environmental impact assessments, while all new applications will now need to be flagged to ministers. But they want the government to go further. Ministers should put a pause on all AI data centre developments in the pipeline, they say. The body's director, Kat Jones, told The National that she believed the steps already announced could point the way to the Scottish Government's approach to the issue in future. She said, "In the 8 months that it's taken for the Scottish Government to start to listen to our points, a lot of extremely concerned communities have started campaigning, and much wider awareness of the issues has built up. We are hopeful that this is the start of a real awareness in the Scottish Government of the seriousness of this issue." John Swinney could announce further steps like a moratorium when he unveils his new programme for government next week, when Holyrood returns after the summer recess. He's under pressure to do exactly that by his party, with the SNP's National Council voting in favour of a pause last month. The Scottish Greens are also campaigning for a moratorium, and they could use the issue as leverage if Mr Swinney proved resistant to calls for a pause. If that happens, we know who had his ear. MPs of all stripes and ministers all the way up to Mr Swinney have been subject to a lobbying blitz by the industry, with at least 31 meetings taking place since the start of last year. The First Minister and the then Business Minister Richard Lochhead met with the American AI cloud company CoreWeave, which is partnering with DataVita on a multi-billion-pound AI growth zone in North Lanarkshire in November to discuss the importance of resilient and sustainable data infrastructure, according to the lobbying register. There is big money behind the AI data centre boom, and they won't want to give up without a fight. Where the dice will fall is anyone's guess. Scotland has taken bold steps on environmental issues before, such as the bans on fracking and nuclear power. Could it do so again? An article from The National, written by Hamish Morrison. The National Politics on Wednesday the 26th of August. Andy Burnham's UK listening tour snubs Scotland. An exclusive front-page article written by Lucy Jackson. Andy Burnham has been branded the first Prime Minister of England after his so-called listening tour of the UK completely avoided Scotland. Earlier this month, Downing Street announced that Mr Burnham would be in listening mode as he embarked on a tour of the nations and regions in Britain. So far, this has included Ilkeston in Derbyshire, Sheffield in South Yorkshire, Wolverhampton in the West Midlands, and Port Talbot in Wales. When the tour was first revealed by the Guardian newspaper in July, the paper reported that Aberdeen was being touted as a location to discuss North Sea policy. The UK government said that Mr Burnham would spend much of the rest of August travelling Britain. But with just 6 days to go until the Westminster recess ends on the 31st of August, Mr Burnham is yet to visit Scotland as part of the tour. When approached by The National earlier this month, Downing Street refused to confirm whether Scotland was included in the itinerary. And when approached on Tuesday afternoon, Number 10 did not deny that Mr Burnham has now concluded his tour. The SNP has branded Mr Burnham the first Prime Minister of England, claiming that his tour of the UK was simply to create TikTok content. The SNP MSP David Linden told The National, "Energy bills are going up again in energy-rich Scotland this week, and it seems as though Andy Burnham's cost of living listening tour has ended without a single visit here. He is the first Prime Minister of England. This listening exercise was all about TikTok content, when the reality is that he doesn't need to listen to see the broken promise staring him in the face. Bills will be £600 higher than the Labour Party promised." Mr Linden added, "Meanwhile, we've had a series of announcements from Andy Burnham that all concern England, as all Scotland got was a warning that our democratic right to decide our own future was off limits." When concerns about the heat waves turn to heating bills, Andy Burnham will be faced with the cold, hard reality of broken Brexit Britain, and hard-working Scots will be hammered once again. It's that simple truth that is exactly why we need a fresh start with independence. Mr Burnham had only visited Scotland once since becoming Prime Minister. He attended the opening ceremony of the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow on the 23rd of July, using the Prime Ministerial jet to travel from London. During the trip, he also met with the First Minister John Swinney, during which he ruled out a second Scottish independence referendum. Mr Burnham told Mr Swinney that another referendum is off limits because it would take the UK government's focus away from growing the economy and helping families with the cost of living. An exclusive front-page article from The National, written by Lucy Jackson. The National News on Wednesday the 26th of August. A consultation opens on a mobile phone ban in Scottish schools. An article written by Lucy Jackson. The Scottish Government has opened a consultation on restricting mobile phones in schools to help work out the finer details of the ban. The consultation aims to give children, young people, parents and carers, school staff and education authorities the opportunity to share their views on what potential legislation could be enforced. The public is encouraged to respond to the consultation until the 17th of November, with the analysis expected to be published early next year. The Education Secretary, Mary McCallan, visited Perth Grammar School on Tuesday to meet teachers who have implemented a ban on phones in classrooms. The school uses boxes where pupils leave their phones at the beginning of a class and then they are returned at the end for use in break times. Ms McCallan said the consultation will be used to take into account any exceptions within a school phone ban. She said, "The consultation begins today and it's based on the government's intention to legislate, to pass laws, to take a national position of ending personal mobile phones in the learning environment, and it builds upon guidance which is already in place, but it asks key questions like, should it be a whole campus ban or should it be a classroom ban? It talks about issues like where there's exceptions. I don't want there to be too many exceptions so as not to undermine the underlying principle. But I'm very clear that young people will sometimes need a mobile phone to manage a medical condition or perhaps if they're young carers to contact home. It's about getting those finer details worked out in consultation with teachers, young people and parents, but also it's about a national provision for the end of mobile phones in the learning environment. Updated guidance was published in June, which encourages schools to restrict the use of phones during teaching and learning time as a minimum, while the proposed mandatory legal restrictions are being developed. Last year, students at Portobello High School and Queensferry High School were issued with wallets to keep their phones in during the school day, which, once sealed, require a magnetic pad to unlock them. Ms McCallan said that she's keen to find alternatives to the expensive pouch system. She continued, "I've already been clear that I don't, for example, support a nationwide rollout of the pouches that we've seen because they're expensive. I think I'm not alone in feeling that I should far rather have that money invested into education than in managing highly addictive technology." The consultation has been published alongside practical guidance for parents to keep their children safe online and to manage their screen time. An article from The National, written by Lucy Jackson. The National News on Wednesday the 26th of August. The legendary country singer Dolly Parton dies aged 80. An article written by Alistair Ferguson. The legendary country singer Dolly Parton has died at the age of 80, her family has said. Her nephew, Brian Seaver, revealed in an Instagram video on Tuesday that Miss Parton had died, as he said his family felt great sadness, but also absolute pride. He said in the video, "My name is Brian Seaver, the son of Cassie Parton, and I'm representing the Parton and Owens family today. announcing the passing of my Aunt Dolly Rebecca Parker Dean. Sister, sis and granny to one generation and Gigi to the next. This video announcement is something that Dolly asked of me years ago before I fully absorb it as a future reality. As her head of security for more than 2 decades, a role my father Larry held before me, I've imagined the heaviness of this moment, but haven't truly felt it until now. It's an honour that is mixed with absolute pride and great sadness. But sadness lies with us, and not with Dolly. Dolly has lived in the light and is in the arms of Jesus, surely met by Carl, her parents, and countless others who have watched her and longed for her to meet them in the heavens. Mr. Seaver added, I first went on the road with Dolly as a kid, getting a taste of the road life in the early 1980s. Dolly opened doors, not just for me, before her entire family reached the potential we didn't even know was possible. Dolly also opened doors for generations of singers, songwriters, musicians, dreamers from every walk of life and across every continent. Mr. Seaver went on to say that Miss Parton would forever stand as an inspiration after devoting more than 65 years to the music industry. Born in Tennessee on the 19th of January 1946, Miss Parton went on to record many country classics, including 9 to 5, Jolene, I Will Always Love You, and Islands in the Stream. Miss Parton shared an update on her health on Friday, acknowledging her recent decline after the March 2025 death of her husband, Carl Dean, whom she spent 60 years married to. He'd been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease in 2019, and he died at the age of 82. The singer had previously had to bow out of several scheduled shows planned for December. Miss Parton started her music career as a child, performing for local radio stations, and recorded her first single, Puppy Love, aged just 11 years old. She then went on to sign her first record deal with Monument Records as a singer-songwriter, aged 19. Miss Parton went on to dominate the US country charts in the late 60s, and she went on to release her debut album, Hello, I'm Dolly. The musician went on to write I Will Always Love You, one of the defining love songs of the 20th century, as a goodbye to her former creative partner, Porter Wagoner, who hired her to be his sidekick on the Porter Wagoner Show and helped her land a record deal. The song became a blockbuster hit when Whitney Houston recorded a cover for the 1992 film The Bodyguard. Miss Parton's own film career began in 1980 when she starred in 9 to 5 with Lily Tomlin and Jane Fonda. Her theme song for the movie became her first #1 single on the Hot 100 chart in the United States. Her other notable film appearances include The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas alongside Burt Reynolds, Rhinestone with Sylvester Stallone, and Steel Magnolias with Julia Roberts and Sally Field. Her 1973 track, Jolene, is widely considered to be one of country music's greatest songs. It was covered by Beyoncé on her 2024 album, Cowboy Carter, which won the Album of the Year Grammy. An article from The National, written by Alistair Ferguson. The National, on Wednesday the 26th of August. Opinion. Jason Arday lived a life that exposed barriers. His death shows that they still exist. A column written by Cowcub Stewart. Shocking and yet not shocking at all. That's the only honest way to describe the media storm that engulfed Professor Jason Arday before his death. The hounding, the relentless scrutiny, the race-baiting, the doubling down. None of it emerged from nowhere. It came from institutions, organisations, workplaces that have long treated people of colour as spectacles, symbols or threats, but rarely as human beings. Freedom of the press is essential to democracy, but freedom without responsibility is simply a licence to run fast and loose with no accountability. And when hundreds of articles, paid adverts and sensationalised narratives are pushed out with no one in the room asking whether the coverage has become dangerous, we must confront a hard truth. The media is not just reporting on structural racism, it's participating in it. The question that haunts me is painfully simple. How much can one human being take before reaching breaking point? When you're not seen as a person first, when your skin colour becomes the lens through which every action is judged and interpreted, and when even death is not enough to trigger honest reflection from those in positions of power and influence, we must ask, what will? Powerful statements of condolence, outrage and condemnation are made. They always are. But statements are not action. Listening that is done only with ears and not with the heart or the head is not listening at all. It's performance. And performance has become the defining feature of how institutions respond to racism. We hear endlessly about tolerance, a word rooted in power. The powerful tolerating the presence of those they deem different, less powerful, and deciding what is acceptable or not. The ability to exert power to exclude, condemn, and ultimately demonize if the tolerated don't play ball. What we need instead is acceptance, the recognition that people of colour have the same right to take up space, to lead, to make mistakes, and to be human. Dr. Arday's death shows how far we still are from that simple truth. Success for people of colour is still framed as exceptional, the first, the youngest, the extraordinary. But exceptionalism is a trap. It places individuals on pedestals so high that no human can sustain the expectations placed upon them. And when they inevitably falter, even slightly, the halo becomes horns. Mistakes are amplified, missteps weaponized, lapses of judgment treated as proof of unfitness. The downfall is relished. This is not accidental, it's structural. It's how systems maintain themselves. I've lived this myself. In the education system, I watched colleagues assume that an Asian pupil should have better behaviour and work ethic because they have strict families. Victims of racist incidents belittled and discouraged from reporting it, as it would make the school look bad. I saw how stereotypes shape expectations, assessments and opportunities. I saw how personal prejudices manifest in less favourable treatment. I experienced the gatekeeping that keeps people of colour out of leadership. I was always one course short, one experience away, one step behind. When I completed everything asked of me, a mentor told me I now had too much experience and would be seen as a threat, the implication being that I needed to dumb down my resume. I went from not enough to too much, never hitting the sweet spot that others seemed to find. I produced detailed statistical analysis and improvement plans, only to see my work quoted back at me months later as an example of good practice attributed to someone else. Invisible labour is not just an academic concept, it's a lived reality. There's been extensive research published, and these experiences are demonstrated in cold, hard statistics. And when I became the first woman of colour elected to the Scottish Parliament in 2021, after standing since 1999, the media celebrated the breaking barriers narrative. But when I tried to move the conversation to education, equalities and structural reform, the interview requests stopped. Some colleagues resented the attention, telling me that there was so much more to me than just being a black, Asian and minority ethnic woman, as if I'd asked for the spotlight or controlled its direction. The stay-in-your-lane message was palpable. It always is. Be good, but not too good. This is why systemic and structural change is so difficult. The current systems benefit those who uphold them. Those that they do not work for are treated as collateral damage, regrettable but acceptable. And when people of colour succeed despite the system, their success is used to excuse the system's failures at best, and at worst to become a target to be taken down and disgraced. Dr. Arday understood this better than anyone. He spoke openly about the invisible labour required of black academics, proving competence repeatedly, navigating microaggressions, working in institutions where senior leadership remains overwhelmingly white. His life was not evidence that the system works. It was evidence of how hard you must work to survive a system that does not see you unless it's convenient. This resonates with so many aspiring people of colour, and it certainly resonates with my experiences. His death must force Scotland to confront the reality that institutional racism is not an abstract concept. It's lived, it's cumulative, and it's deadly. Scotland has the tools to act, and it must use them with the urgency required. We cannot keep repeating the cycles of crisis management. We need a statutory public sector anti-racism duty, not optional, not advisory, not aspirational, but a legal obligation. We need audits of recruitment, promotion and retention across universities, schools, public bodies and government agencies. Gatekeeping must be named and dismantled. Glasgow University, as well as Cambridge University, has questions to answer over its safeguarding policies and culpability on what ensued. We need anti-racism to be funded, not merely endorsed. A national anti-racism investment fund. Multi-year funding for community organisations must be given serious consideration, and public sector budgets should be tied to measurable outcomes. We need to strengthen Scotland's anti-racism delivery plan with statutory powers, move from consultation to delivery, and make anti-racism a core priority of government that is cross-portfolio. We need media accountability, not censorship, but enforceable ethical standards to address the race-baiting, disproportionate coverage and targeted hounding that occurs again and again. Freedom of the press must come with responsibility to the public it serves. And above all, we need to redesign the systems that produce inequality. Not more symbolic gestures, they are easy. We need structural change, systemic reform, accountability, power redistribution. That's hard, as the very people that benefit from the status quo and do well out of it are the ones that have the power and influence to make the changes. Will they, or will they just make another statement to gain brownie points? Forgive the pun. When a human being is hounded to breaking point because their success is seen through the lens of their skin colour, and when their death still does not trigger honest reflection from those in power, we are not dealing with isolated failures. We are living inside a system functioning exactly as designed. The only moral response is to redesign it. Professor Jason Arday's life showed us where the barriers are. His death shows us the cost of leaving them in place. Scotland must decide whether it will continue to tolerate that cost or finally accept the responsibility to change. A column written by Cowcub Stewart, who was a former SNP MSP for Glasgow Kelvinside. The National News on Wednesday the 26th of August. UK energy bills are to hit a 3-year high this winter, according to Ofgem. An article written by Marco Sutti. The SNP has accused Andy Burnham of breaking his promise to bring down the cost of living, as household energy bills are set to rise to a 3-year high this winter. The regulator Ofgem announced on Wednesday morning that its energy price cap will increase by 4%, with the typical household paying £60 more a year from October. The cap will rise to £1,723 for the average household using both electricity and gas if that level was sustained for a year, an increase of around £5 a month. The announcement means that energy bills have now risen 7 times since Labour came to power, despite previous promises to reduce bills by £300. The SNP Westminster leader Dave Dugan said, "Just 1 month into the job and Andy Burnham has already broken his promise to cut the cost of living, as household bills soar on his watch in broken Brexit Britain. Energy bills have risen 7 times under this Labour government. They're now a whacking £563 higher than the Labour Party promised during the election, and instead of reducing the cost of living like he pledged, Andy Burnham is presiding over yet another big hike in prices. It's no wonder that the Prime Minister ended his cost of living listening tour early and failed to stop off in Scotland. People don't want to be used for Andy Burnham's TikTok content while their bills rise to a 3-year high. They want money in their pockets and urgent help now." The increase comes as households prepare for colder weather and greater use of heating, with a new cap coming into effect on the 1st of October and remaining in place for 3 months. And there could be another significant increase in the new year. Analysts at Cornwall Insight forecast on Wednesday that the price cap could rise by a further 9% in January, taking the typical annual bill to £1,872, £149 higher than the October figure. Ofgem have said that the latest increase reflects higher wholesale gas prices resulting from volatile international markets. Neil Kenwood, Ofgem's Director General for Markets, said, "High international gas prices are continuing to drive energy costs in the UK. We welcome the government's intervention to remove VAT from electricity bills, without which customers would have faced even higher costs this winter. Savings are available by choosing a fixed tariff, which are available at £100 or more below the October price cap, and many suppliers offer tariffs with cheaper electricity to smart meter customers for electricity consumed out of peak times." The Energy Secretary, Meata Fanbulla, acknowledged that families would be concerned about the increase but defended the rise. "Energy is an everyday essential and it needs to be affordable for everyone, which is why we've cut VAT on electricity bills from October to give families some breathing space," she said. This has limited the rise in the price cap and follows the £150 in costs we removed from bills earlier this year, and we'll keep looking at what more we can do to protect families from unaffordable bills. The End Fuel Poverty Coalition has warned that the rise in gas prices will have a particularly severe impact on households. Gas unit rates are set to increase from 6.29 pence per kilowatt hour last winter to 8 pence from the 1st of October, a rise of around 27% year on year and the highest level since early 2023. The coalition's coordinator Simon Francis said, "The Ofgem price cap may limit the unit rates and standing charges that customers pay, but sadly it doesn't cap the number of people suffering due to rising energy costs. As with previous rises, it's the price of gas driving this latest increase. Every unit of gas used will be 27% more expensive than last winter and over 150% higher than the end of 2020. Price rises fall hardest on the households who can least afford them, with millions forced to pay more for the same energy or ration the energy that they use even further." He called on ministers to expand support programmes, introduce an energy debt relief scheme and increase efforts to improve the energy efficiency of homes. Mr Dugan said the rise showed that Scotland remained exposed to high energy prices despite its energy resources. The SNP MP added, "This month alone we've seen energy bills up, inflation up and the price of oil up. This is not the change that Andy Burnham promised, and it means that most families will be worse off this winter. Scotland is an energy-rich country, and it's a disgrace that under Westminster control we're being forced to pay sky-high prices for a resource that we have in abundance. The fact that the UK government has taken over £400 billion of Scotland's energy wealth and hoarded it at Westminster, while the Labour Party destroys thousands of Scottish energy jobs, underlines why Scotland needs independence so that we can lower energy bills, invest in our economy, create jobs and build a better future." The latest price cap is calculated using Ofgem's updated definition of a typical consumer, which came into effect in July to reflect falling household energy use. Using its previous definition, the October price would be equivalent to £1,941 a year, compared with £1,862 currently. An article from The National, written by Marco Sutti. The National World News on Wednesday the 26th of August. President Trump is considering renaming Lake Ontario. An article issued by the National News Desk. Donald Trump said that he's considering changing the name of Lake Ontario to Lake America as the trade war between the United States and Canada intensifies. The United States is giving serious consideration to changing the name of Lake Ontario to Lake America, in that we don't expect to be doing much business with Ontario any longer, the president said on social media. The Trump administration imposed 50% tariffs over the weekend on Canadian goods following the collapse of trade negotiations. The rhetoric between the two countries is escalating, with President Trump telling Canadian leaders on Monday to fall in line or face consequences far worse than existing tariffs. President Trump threatened new 50% tariffs on Canadian vehicles, car parts and steel, while Prime Minister Mark Carney said United States trade demands showed that Washington wanted to destroy our major industries, including vehicles, steel and aluminium. Canada struck yesterday with retaliatory tariffs on about $20 billion or £15 billion worth of American goods, including steel, dairy products, appliances and farm equipment. Mr. Carney accused Washington of trying to subordinate Canada and said that United States demands during the failed talks showed that Americans wanted to destroy our major industries. The tariffs will take effect from the 8th of September at rates of 15%, 25% and 50%, with Canada matching the corresponding US tariff rate on more than 700 products such as pulp and paper and electronics. Canada and the United States have deeply integrated supply chains across vehicles, energy, agriculture and manufacturing, making a prolonged trade fight potentially costly for businesses and workers on both sides of the border. An article from The National, issued by the National News Desk.
That concludes this week's edition of The National Podcast. Please remember to subscribe to our channels at Tune Review and to tell your friends about our service.